Hi, Matt.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Gail.
Hi, Matt. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Back from New York.
No, not yet. I'm still in upstate New York.
Hi, Terry.
Hello. How's everybody? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
There you go. Look at that, honey. Yeah, if you talk, it's cool. There you are.
Hey, Terry, good to see you, man.
Hey, how are you? Good
Good.
to see you.
The microphone? Yeah, I guess.
Matt's got that upper state New York tan.
Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Mary.
I'm sorry I missed you all last week.
We know you just took off so you didn't have to see us.
Yeah, I just faked the whole COVID thing just to avoid.
Not the fake.
Happens all the time.
I'm gonna sit back here.
Okay.
I don't know if it's better or worse if she faked it or if she intentionally went out and got it to avoid you. I don't know which is.
Oh, both would be bad.
Oh,
So Mary didn't
I was
either.
gonna say that
neither
kind
of
of just seems equally bad, doesn't it?
And as folks come
Hey,
in,
Ellen.
Hey.
if you could mute as you come in, that'd be great. Unless you're speaking, and that's fine. Like Gail, you don't have to mute, but for barking dogs and that sort of thing.
Hey everyone.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
So
We're still waiting for our list.
It's on my list.
Yeah,
Thanks.
just like the
Very-
checks in the mail, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, I miss you guys already. I just want you to know.
I would miss you too, Ellen. It was great meeting you last week.
Feels like it was just yesterday, but also a month ago.
I know. I
Exactly.
know.
A lot has happened.
Hey, Deb.
And Mary, looks like you're recording this. Cool.
You guys are ready to start? I think we've got a nice group in here, some familiar faces and names. We're excited to get going. Like Matt said, if you all could just mute yourselves so we don't pick up any background noise while we're talking, and then we will have lots of time for question and answers and chatting at the end. So real quick to get started today, welcome to our archaeology lunch and learn. These are programs we try to do now once a month. We were doing them more often during the height of the pandemic, but try to do one once a month to stay in touch with everyone, let you all know what we're finding, what new discoveries have come out in sort of our latest research. Today is really exciting. It's going to follow a similar format to last month's program, in which we'll have a panel discussion and a little bit of a informative presentation at the beginning. I am Mary Furlong Minkoff. I am the Assistant Director of Archaeology and the Curator of Archaeological Collections here at Montpelier, and I'm going to serve basically as the moderator for today. I might jump in and help answer some of the questions too along the way. But in addition to our sort of regular team, Matt Reeves, our Director of Archaeology and Landscape Restoration, and Chris Pash, our Field Director, we also are joined by a face that is going to be familiar to many of you, Dr. Terry Brock, who used to be the Assistant Director of Archaeology here at Montpelier, but now get a load of these titles. You think I have a lot of titles? He's beat me out again. So he is the Manager of Archaeology and Research for the Wake Forest Historical Museum. He's a part-time assistant teaching professor with Cultural Heritage and Preservation and the Director of the Cultural Heritage and Archaeology Research Group, all at Wake Forest University. So Terry's research and work at Wake Forest, we've been really lucky that he's been able to build in his relationship and work at Montpelier as part of his kind of new job, new career at Wake Forest. And yes, Chris, its title is almost as long as his hair, but not quite as long as Matt's hair yet. So, so what we're going to do today is Matt's going to give us a little bit of background, and then we're going to have a conversation where I'll ask them some questions. And then we're going to open it up to everyone to ask questions. And you can either put questions in the chat and I can answer them, or you can raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you and you can ask questions. If you have questions at any point during the program, you don't necessarily want to wait to the end, feel free to put them in the chat. But there may be some that we're going to answer for you along the way. I also encourage you all to look at the cuteness that is Terry's mom's picture, Janet Brock's picture of Terry's two little girls hugging each other, which is very sweet. So with that being said, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can give us a little background information about what we're talking about today.
Cool. Thank you, Mary. Well, I didn't notice Janet's picture there, so thanks for pointing out that out. That's adorable. But yeah, we're going to be talking about where we are at with the Overseer's site, and I'm going to go ahead and share screens. Throughout much of this discussion, we're going to be using our GIS maps to show, where things are and some of the artifacts and features that we've been locating. But where the Overseers, and can everyone see my my screen? Okay, awesome. Where the Overseer's site is just down the hill from the Montpelier Visitor Center. This is a Google map. It's a GIS map, but it's essentially an aerial map of the property. Here's the main house right here with that we've recently restored about 12 years ago. Here's the visitor center that many of y'all have been to, and just down the hill from the visitor center is this large farm complex that we've found and been surveying over the past several years. And what really keyed us into the farm complex being here, and this being the main farm complex, is on a 1844 plat. There was shown the location of the Overseer's house just down the hill from the main house, this right here. And we believe, based on survey that we'll be talking about today, that it's the site that's in this area right here. So with the an overview of the Overseer, this is as we had finished excavations at the end of 2020. This is the Overseer's house right here, adjacent to the Madison family cemetery, and just down the hill from the visitor center. And one of the reasons we're looking at the Overseer's house is it's an incredibly important part of understanding this larger farm complex, but also in terms of, what we're about at Montpelier, being the home of the foundation for the Constitution. what the overseer's house allow us to talk about is a whole, another spectrum of the who was able to enjoy citizenship based on the fundamentals of the Constitution that was as it was devised in the 1790s. And being a plantation, visitors are always introduced to the fact that in the 1820s, the period that we've restored to, African Americans, most especially enslaved African Americans, were not considered citizens, nor were women. And of course, the third tier of that elitist leg is that white males that did not own property were also not granted citizenship. And so this is a question that's come up at the overseer's house is, for the white laborers that would be present at Montpelier, which would have included the overseer, would they have been in this realm of citizenship? And it allows us to talk about this. So that's kind of the big picture of the overseers. And in terms of what we're doing at the overseers and what we're going to be talking about today, this is the just in the bizarre 3 years that we've had with COVID and everything else. This is the third fall we've been doing excavations at the overseers. And this is the third fall that we've been looking at exploring with 5x5 units, like you see in this shot right here, features that we found through metal detector survey, concentrations of artifacts that have shown up in shovel test pit surveys, and then also areas that have been of interest from our ground penetrating radar surveys. So we'll be talking about some of what we found over the past 3 fall seasons and excavation units, and then what we're looking at this fall, which is another area that might have might be where the overseer's house site is ? Or it might be another component of the overseer's house site. But what we found at the overseer's house in this large area, basically, if you can see where my little magnifying glass is, if you can see that. Basically, the overseer's house turns out to be this very large complex of buildings and features that probably incorporated not just the overseer's house, but more than likely the dwellings for enslaved households that were in this area, and work areas as well. So we're exploring all this right now. And Mary, I'm trying to keep my introduction very brief, so I don't get into some of the other questions you're going to be asking us, and I'm sure that people want to ask. How did I do, Mary?
Great. You did great.
I'm going to stop sharing screens. So there.
So I wanted to just kind of jump off of what Matt said. And one of the things he showed us was that 1844 map. But one thing we have learned is that 1844 maps aren't always exact. So I'm going to kind of go to Terry first and Chris to talk a little bit about how the archaeological evidence is, what it's suggesting about this being possibly a location for the overseers through the survey work and the initial examinations.
Yeah, I think, when we've superimposed that map and georeferenced it over the broader landscape, it covers that entire area that Matt was sort of emphasizing, and then some. So the house that's on that sketch is most certainly not to scale. And so, but what it does give us, right, is a place to start. And that's really important. And we do know, right, that other things that are noted on that map, such as the Madison home, the location of the mill, again, while not pinpoint accurate, are at least in relationship to each other the way they existed, and in some cases still exist on the landscape. So that map is a really excellent clue, but it's also it's one piece of evidence, right, to help us start to narrow things down. And that's where, for those of you who've come out and worked on the home farm survey project all over, that we've employed lots of different methods to narrow things down, right? The 20-meter metal detector survey, the 10-foot metal detector survey, the ground penetrating radar, the shovel test pits, all to help us go from that really big, broad scale and narrow things down. And the the data that we've gotten so far has been, I think, really promising. And now I will try to share screens. This is you can all see this map here. This is the handiwork of Chris. Wonderful work, Chris. Thanks for sharing this with me exactly 1 hour ago. So when we look at the distributions of so what you see here on this map are all the shovel test pits. All of these dots are representative of shovel test pits that have been excavated.
Hey, Terry,
Yeah.
would you be able to zoom out on the map for a second and show where the visitor center is? Just kind of
Yes.
context.
Sorry. Visitor centers right here. If you helped us on blacksmith shop, you were digging here. If you were doing farrier shop, you were down here. If you were out here this summer, you were over here. And this is the barn, the new barn that was found. Cemetery, Madison Family Cemetery is here. Enslaved Community Cemetery is their main house up here. Does everyone know where they are in the world now? So these dots all reflect a shovel test pit, which are Chris, does one of these have the actual pictures on it?
It should be the STP view layer, and you should be able to go down and see the attachment.
I don't know why I can't scroll on any of these. Weird. All right. Well, STP is about a 1¼ foot diameter hole that we dig straight down. And then we collect the artifacts from them, and we can make distribution maps to show us where we have high concentrations of things and where we have low concentrations of things. So we can map our concentrations of window glass, for example. If we're looking for structures, where we want to think about the artifacts that are associated with the architecture, right? So window glass, typically in buildings, right? And nails, there's nails everywhere. So that one maybe not quite as helpful as it could be, right? Personal favorite for this site is brick distribution. You can see this huge concentration of brick located down here. And then we have kind of smaller blobs around it, and also some dead spaces, which is interesting as well. But just an enormous concentration of brick located down in these areas. And we put excavation units in these areas as well. And that's actually where we started seeing architecturally related features, some subfloor pits here, an enormous borrow pit right here, which borrow pits are typically associated with log cabin structures that would be nearby, because the clay is being sourced out of those borrow pits to do the chinking in between the logs. And then as all humans have done forever and ever, we fill our holes with garbage. So this pit, although unexcavated, we can tell just by looking at the top of it that it is full of stuff. So this really helps us, using the survey data and the unit excavation data to start seeing where we're seeing evidence of architectural of buildings and structures. So this is, for my money, this is probably going to be the location of where the largest, most substantial structure would be on the site. The fact that it has brick associated with it is quite unique. All the other buildings that we found in the home farm, the brick is almost non-existent in those structures, particularly nothing of the quantity that we have here. So that's related to these buildings that are in the home farm complex. And one thing that we've learned from previous research comparing the buildings that are near the main house and include the main house, and as you move to the stable quarter and then to the structures that the dwellings that enslaved laborers are living in the home farm, is the brick gradually reduces. And I think the fact that we may have the overseer site here, and that's associated with somebody who is in that kind of managerial class, and also is not enslaved, a building that has brick as part of the architecture points to that. The other piece is the location on the landscape. This is a space that's up on a ridge. It's the highest, one of the higher elevations in this area. So you can, when you stand in this area today, you can see a lot of the other buildings, the field quarters that are located down, or the slave dwellings that are located down here, very close to the blacksmith shop, area that would have you would have wanted under high surveillance. So the location of this building in relationship to the other activities that are happening is another element that fits patterns that we see in plantation management all over the mid-Atlantic, deep South, and in most plantation contexts where overseer houses exist. So lots of really strong evidence, I think, to position us to hypothesize that we have the right spot, and this is really ready for testing, I think. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
one of the other things that really strikes me is the window glass, and that's really
Mhm.
different than what we found throughout the home farm. And we haven't found that much window glass, or I haven't seen that much window glass come through the lab since we were in the South Yard. So that's another clue as to not only the domestic use of the building, but the substantialness of the building, the architectural type. Chris, is there
I'll tell
anything?
you what, I'm just flipping between these two things, and what I am loving is the window glass kind of over here and over here, and the brick taking up all that space in the middle. That really may suggest, right, that we've got chimney fall or something that's tipped in one or the other direction. Whereas window glass, if you've broken a window, you know, window glass falls right below your window, right? Whereas a chimney is going to tip over and fall away from a building. So, and then that all correlates with where all these
And then
subpoints are.
another thing to note, when Terry's talking about chimney fall, this site is also unique. I'm not sure if Matt mentioned it at the outset, but this area, everything north of Westgate Road, which you can see there, has been plowed several times over the last 120 years, probably more like 150. But unlike everything south of Westgate Road and much of the property, we have intact strata, but in plow zone, because it's been plowed, all of the layers are all churned up. So if you get a chimney fall, of course, you're going to have a scatter of brick, but that's not all isolated into one layer. So it's still generally in the location of where the chimney fell, but it's just, it's going to move anywhere from, as much as 15 feet from its original location of deposition, roughly speaking.
For the most part, stuff doesn't move side to side too much with plowing. So it's pretty, I think we're in pretty good shape.
There's a great example of that in St. Mary's, the site I dug on for my field school. It was a cruciform shaped church. And in the plow zone, it had been plowed, like you're saying, Chris, at this site, that site had been plowed for 200 years. And when we did a field walkover and mapped in where the brick is, it mapped into a cruciform shape with the brick foundation and was right on top of the brick foundation. And what Tim Reardon, who is the chief archaeologist there at the time, field archaeologist, he did an estimation of around 5 feet is the average movement. It can be greater, but at 5 feet is the average. And that's kind of the magic for picking 5 foot by 5 foot units. One of the many reasons is that's the average distance. I won't say maximum, but the average distance that things move with plowing. But one thing that strikes me with all this is that just how large an area is covered by the brick and the window glass distribution, and that it speaks to potentially more than one building being there and the complexity of this site. And one thing I didn't mention in the beginning introduction is what we're doing right now is basically an assessment of the site to understand where the features are. And we've got an NEH grant that Terry was largely responsible for writing before, and we received right before Terry left. And that grant is going to be paying for the phase 3 or the more intensive investigation of features that we've been finding over these past 3 fall seasons. And before we begin that excavation of those features, we're going to be talking with a lot of different constituent groups, most especially the Montpelier Descendant Committee, on what questions can be raised and answered by the excavations at the Overseer's site. And this, the Overseer is set within a community of the enslaved. And so that's why these questions, what we're doing is figuring out enough information to figure out what we can know from the Overseer's site. And then we're going to go into consultation with the MDC and talk and think about what research questions to ask. So this is kind of the first phase of this larger project.
And Matt, just to build on that also, and a little bit with what when you were talking about the way that the Constitution impacts, these questions, right? Not only were the overseers embedded in a community of enslaved people, right, but everybody who's on this plantation is living within the context of a government that systematically protected slavery as an institution. And that impacts the lives of everybody who's living on this place. There would be no overseers who had to oversee enslaved laborers and their work if there was no slavery. So, so their lives, how they're building their identities, how they're, the careers that they had, the professions that they have, the way they move through the world is impacted by that institution that the Constitution protects in different ways than it impacts the lives of the enslaved African Americans, of course, and in different ways than it impacts the lives of the Madisons. But that's one of the really interesting components of learning more about the white overseers who lived at in this place.
So I think you all set up a really good part I really would like you to tease out a little bit more is the complexity of this site. So we've, sort of by the slip of the tongue often called it the overseer's house, but what we're really talking about is a complex of lots of buildings, lots of structure, and lots of people. So can you talk a little, and I don't know who the best is to answer this, but kind of the two from what other buildings besides basically an overseer's main house should we expect to find, or what other features should we kind of expect to find, and what archaeological evidence that we found thus far is pointing to those?
I mean, I would expect to find any kind of building that would support structures that are typically around the dwellings of free white people. So, so that's going to include possibly smokehouse or other typical outbuildings that we might find. I think that the other thing we haven't mentioned yet is that the Edens family that lived, that were one of those kind of principal overseer families of the Madisons from like 1817 to 1829. I might be getting those dates wrong. I haven't said them out loud in a while. Was a landowner and was a slave owner. We know that they own 16 people and 700 acres in Orange County. So, so I think there's also the likelihood that there are dwellings for enslaved laborers as part of this complex, I think is also possible. So that's certainly not outside of the realm of possibility.
And like you mentioned, go ahead, Chris.
And of course, like Terry mentioned, there are going to be other buildings associated with this household site or larger complex, but there's also going to be a number of other features that are not building specific, like possible fence lines or less defined workspaces that are more show up in the record from scatters of artifacts that might not have an architectural component to them. So we do expect to find all those things, and we have, looks like Terry's going to bring it up, we have already found, speaking of architectural stuff, Terry's right on the well, which is, it has architectural components, brickwork and stone that's been infilled. Since you pulled it up, Terry, did you want to chat about it, or?
Yeah, it was what I thought you were headed for. This is another, another structure or another entity that's on this site is this well. That was all I was going for. But yeah, there's, yard spaces, workspaces, types of things that we've explored before. How are those being used and used differently or the same? There's all kinds of structures that are associated with a dwelling that I think we can expect to find.
The kind of buildings, Pandora alluded to this in a question in the chat, is it could be everything from a log style structure with a stick and mud chimney, like Terry initially mentioned, and those are typical of what we find among outbuildings all across the property in our excavations and surveys. And they wouldn't have any foundations like a scatter of brick that we're finding. And then with the brick, what that suggests is most likely the amount of brick is a building with a brick chimney, which what we found from excavations at Montpelier is that's typically associated with a framed structure that would be either set on a foundation or on piers. And other buildings that could have been in this area, we simply don't know. There could be work buildings, storage buildings for tools. Just the size of this site suggests that there would be other buildings as well.
I think one of the ones we also always need to think about is a kitchen. A separate kitchen is
absolutely
going to be essential for understanding this space, and always to remember that those spaces, when we go to the South Yard and we go to what we have called the South Kitchen, we always need to remember it's a kitchen and a quarter, and that these work buildings are often double use as for housing enslaved people as well as workspaces. And so thinking about this, just the complexity of this space. One of the other things, and Terry mentioned this a little bit, but I wanted to circle back to it just a second, is there's a lot of, I would say in popular culture, the depiction of overseers in movies and things like that are often as being sort of very low class financially. And we also see not only is that in sort of popular culture and illustrations, in art, in movies in the modern sense, but following the end of slavery, there was a real concerted effort by large enslavers, powerful enslavers, to distance themselves from the institution of slavery and put much of the brutality on traders, overseers, and sort of this other group of people. And I've used this example many times, but one of the ones I'm always struck by is in Maryland, at the plantation site in which Frederick Douglass was enslaved. The family that owned that plantation site from the 1700s still owns it. And their matriarch, who is passed about 10 years ago, still would always say, my family didn't own Frederick Douglass. The overseer owned Frederick Douglass, and really wanted to make that distinction. And through sort of popular culture, that's happened. So what are kind of the myths and misconceptions of overseers, but also how is what we're seeing here different than, let's say, what they found at Monticello, where they've also looked at an overseer's house? Dr. Barak, I know you've thought about this a bit.
Yeah, the perceptions of who overseers, white overseers in particular. I mean, that's another perception, right? Is that all overseers are white overseers, and that's not the case either. Enslaved Black men typically were also used in the role of overseer, driver, and we know that happened at Montpelier as well. Sawney and was an African-American, enslaved African-American who oversaw an entire tract of land on the property. So Sawney's tract was what it was called. So we know that there is diversity in the types of people who are occupying that position as well. The overseer occupies a really strange position, right? That and we've actually the plantation that I'm researching now here in Wake Forest, North Carolina, the enslaver has kept a really detailed farm journal, and the vast majority of the really interesting bits of that journal are his lists of overseer faults, where he literally has an annotated list of all the things his overseer does wrong. And very often they're about like, did not punish this person enough, right? Or punish this person incorrectly, or wish that this person had been whipped, but my overseer did not. Lots of complaining about overseers standing around with their hands in their pockets. Right, but that's not taking into account the complex situation that overseer is in, right? Why did he decide to punish Jim in a different way or not as harshly as the plantation owner and enslaver wanted it to happen, right? It's because the overseer has to negotiate and navigate a space where the person who is paying his rent, right, and providing him a place to live and paying his salary wants, and making sure that the enslaved laborers are doing the work that he needs them to do, right? So there's this position that overseers always this tension that they're always kind of occupying in this middle space. And you know, we learn, we've been conditioned and learned that enslaved laborers are, or that overseers are poor, right? That they are quote unquote white trash, right? And that's not always the case, and is not often the case. They're usually middle class to upper, people who are looking to advance and move up the economic and social ladder. That's what the work at Monticello has shown. They expected to find, you know, compared to enslaved labor ceramics, they were expecting to find print types that were going to be of higher value, and they found things that were of lower value. And then they went and looked to see what that overseer had done with his life after he stopped being the overseer at Monticello. He went and bought a plantation and enslaved laborers. He was saving money, right? He wasn't investing his money in getting nice ceramics. He was investing his money and saving so that he could buy a plantation and move up, right? That's moving up an economic class, that's moving up a social class, and that's moving up a political class, because now he gets to vote. So the motivations and things like that for taking these overseer positions are often different than what we have been led to believe they are, right? So there's a lot of extra complexity. And then the Edens family adds this whole new wrinkle as well, with Artie being somebody who owns land and enslaved laborers, right? Artie is in those social circles, and yet is managing this plantation on behalf of the Madisons as well. So just another, you know, as should probably stop surprising us at this point. Right, human beings run the gamut, and just because we've given someone the label of overseer or the label of enslaved or the label of enslaver, that does not necessarily mean that they're all monolith, right? And that they're all occupying these positions or have been forced to occupy these positions in different ways, and that there's individuality and humanity, and that they're all bringing to those to what we can learn about them.
Rebecca Davis asked a question about that can get at what you're asking about, Mary, and what you're talking about, Terry. What would there be a difference in material culture that is associated with enslaved driver versus overseer? And that's one thing that's really fascinating about the plat from 1848 showing the overseer's house. The buildings it shows on that map are the main house, the mill, and the overseers. And this was a plat that was basically designed to sell Montpelier, to make it into something that would be interesting for the next buyer to purchase. And it suggests a level of investment in the building. Potentially, this is what we need to look at, that could signal the structure that we're looking for being the overseer's house. And this is something that we see, like when we originally did our NEH project 10 years ago, looking at the domestic and the architectural space of enslaved domestics, house slaves, as compared to other slaves across the plantation. One thing that was really differentiated the buildings was their place in relationship to the main house and the architectural elements that were in those buildings. So almost all the buildings across the property, probably 96% of them are all log structures with a stick and mud chimney, very little, like we were all talking about, very little brick, very little window glass. And the buildings that were near the main house that were visible in the south yard to have both brick and window glass. And those were probably built in that way because they were meant to be seen from the main house and signal the wealth and the treatment of a certain group of slaves by the Madisons. And then all of a sudden in the home farm, the only structure that has this sort of signature, artifact signature of bricks and window glass is in the area where that map shows the overseer's house. So I think Becca, if I was going to answer that question now before we've done even, gotten into the main research excavations with the phase 3 excavations of all these features, I think that it would be the architectural style of buildings is potentially going to be a signifier, but this is what we need to test. And this is why, what we're doing right now is generating enough information about this site to ask those kind of questions that you just presented is, what can we, based on what we're finding, what are the research questions we want to ask of the subfloor pit that we found, where we're finding hearth sweepings, and typically has been associated with buildings that are log buildings that are lived in by enslaved individuals. And then you've got this brick, scatter of brick, is what kind of questions we want to ask of that building that typically would not have a subfloor pit, or maybe it would. So, we're at the point right now where we're not providing more answers, we're more looking for questions to ask of this record. And that's the one thing that really is exciting about this project is we're looking to develop this as, one of the most community-led projects that we've done to this date, which is bringing in, the group who has demonstrated a commitment to Montpelier, the Montpelier Descendant Committee, in, looking at these questions, looking at what we found and then generating questions. And actually there's two folks on the call. I don't mean to call anybody out, but Dr. Michael Blakey and Dr. Iris Ford are with us today. And they were invited to be advisors on the NEH grant and are here today as well. So thank you all for being here.
So
I think sorry.
I was going to go to Chris because I really wanted him to sort of talk about what's going on this season. We've only been back at Overseer since the end of August and haven't been there since, I guess, 2019.
2020. Yeah.
2020.
I just wanted to add something really quick to additionally for Rebecca's question. I'll be super quick. The other thing is that there has not been a lot of archaeology done on Overseer sites anywhere. Right. So when it comes to us thinking about, well, what does the archaeological signature of an overseer site look like? Right. We don't have that lots and lots of examples of those sites for us to go look at to build those models so that we can make that argument. And even less to distinguish between a driver and an overseer. Right. Even when you look through the state files of the projects that have happened, it's always like, might be an overseer, because it's like, is it an overseer's house? Is it a slave dwelling? We're not sure. It's out here in where the fields would be, and it's a dwelling, right? So picking apart what, that's one of the reasons, I think one of the reasons why the NEH grant was a success was because we were able to say, this is something that a lot of people haven't looked at, and we have a pretty well controlled situation where we can do this comparative work to kind of tease out, is there a signature that speaks to Overseer versus other domestic sites. Okay, now I'm done.
That's all right. And even before I get to Mary's question, there were some things I wanted to add to that. But if I'm not, there's no time, Mary, just yell at me.
You're good.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share screen. So I know we've been bringing up that map a lot, but this is an overlay of the comparison of the 1844 plat with some of all of these sites that we have found, which are so that kind of gets at this. There's a bias in the documentary record of like what we actually have available to us and what was the focus at the time of the sale. So we know there's all these other sites that were in this space in the home farm that aren't represented on this map that we see archaeologically. Another thing that I'll stop sharing because it's not relevant, is there's this one overseer's house labeled on that map, but there are tons of overseers noted in the documentary record from the Madison time period. Some of them are listed just overseer and with no name attached. Sometimes it's a single name that maybe they were hired to do one specific task, or they're like Abram Eddins or others who were serving in a more higher role hierarchically in the plantation economy, thinking of it as like a business and a business model perspective. So like getting at Terry's question there or Terry's answer, or adding to it, is there may be other sites associated with overseers at Montpelier beyond just this site, and figuring that out is going to be even more difficult. But I think building that model will be super cool at some point. And let's see, there's some, and also I've been holding on to a lot of things throughout. It kind of circling back to a question Carol Digg had asked earlier about studying non-rich white people. And you can't really separate them from the economy of slavery. Like you can't study them just as an isolated group because they're so interconnected. We know economically and socially they're so interconnected with the system of the plantation economy and the systems of slavery and that the culture of the time. But we're also seeing that play out in the archaeological record. We are seeing how the roads and paths that we're discovering archaeologically show this very integrated plantation landscape. And we're seeing thus far overlap in the material culture between some of the enslaved dwellings that we found within the home farm, as well as the current hypothesized overseer's house site. Some of the same exact patterns on the ceramics and wear types. So that it's a more integrated economy, that you can't study any of these social groups as a separate monolith. I can't remember who mentioned monoliths. Maybe that was Terry or Matt. So anyways, hopefully that gets at your question, Carol, but it is useful because they're a vector of these intersecting identities getting at plantation life. But anyways, let's talk about this season. I'm gonna share screen again. So a lot of the areas we focused on in 2019 and 2020 is the bulk of these excavation units you see here. Can everyone see this map all right? These diagonal transects of units, and we were focusing on primarily what Terry was talking about earlier, was that brick concentration, as well as the general concentration in metal detector hits, which correlated with our STP data as well. So we really were focusing on this area here. Now, as Terry mentioned, there's this well right here, this historic well, and all of our units kind of were concentrated to the east of that well. Imagine a dividing line down the site. Conveniently, there was also a large trench unit dug in back in 1999 into 2000 that connected, basically it was exploring this area south of Mount Pleasant, which is located up here. And there was this long trench dug down to the well. So this season, we are focusing on the area to the east of that trench and the well. So earlier this month, we completed the shovel test pits all in this half of the site through a major volunteer effort. A lot of former staff came out to help, which was amazing. Let me go back to the artifacts. So there's a couple interesting concentrations. So we've got one concentration of artifacts here, another that we actually got some clarity that's forming this halo around the well space. There's a lot of window glass and some interesting objects in there. And then one thing of note, in 2019 and 2020, we didn't put any units up there, but there are these additional concentrations to the north of the site within all material types. There's not a lot of evidence necessarily that it's buildings, but it could be a fenced in area, but it could also be outbuildings. So there's just a lot of questions. There were no GPR, that's short for ground penetrating radar. There were no ground penetrating radar anomalies in this space, but over in this area, there is one very exciting ground penetrating radar anomaly that correlated with a very cool feature that we're hoping is architectural, given the components in it. So it's filled with brick and mortar, and the plow zone. So far, we've already begun excavating on this unit last week, and the plow zone is filled with brick and mortar. So we're hoping there's something architectural there. How do I get out of this? So basically, our questions this season are kind of exploring, is there another outbuilding here? Is there some evidence of activities going on around the wells? You're going to get certain types of workspaces or leisure spaces or whatever that could be associated with the well, but we just want to explore that. Already from the shovel test pit data, we've got a concentration of small finds. Sometimes Mary calls these the sexy artifacts, but we're getting a lot of pipe stems all along the ridge here. There's actually quite a drop off from where these STPs stop. The reason for that is the cut of Westgate Road is pretty steep and is located right here, but the small finds are very concentrated on this ridge and specifically around the well. So we're getting a lot of that, like buttons and pipe bowls, pipe stems, that kind of thing. So worth exploring. So you can see we've decided to place some excavation units here along the ridge, exploring the archaeological features we found associated with this GPR anomaly. And hopefully later in the fall, we'll get to exploring these other concentrations up here at the north end of the site. One last thing, and I'll let you have follow-up questions, Mary or anyone else, but we are close to Mount Pleasant, and we're getting closer to Mount Pleasant, that is, which is up in here. And so we're getting a lot of overlap in the material culture between those two sites. So we're getting a lot of Delft or tin glazed earthenwares, a lot of late 18th century, mid 18th century ceramics mixed in with mid 19th century ceramics. So some potential further avenues of study of, the 18th century landscape and how that kind of evidence for the tracking in time or changes through time playing out in the material record.
And I'll just say, this is where the challenge of plow zone archaeology comes into play, because at a previous sites that we've worked on at Montpelier, we'd be able to break those those Mount Pleasant layers would show up, and those artifacts would be deeper than the Overseer site layers. So we'd be able to distinguish which layer belongs to what. Plow zone, all of those layers are churned up and mixed up together. So you'll have 1730s ceramics next to 1840s ceramics next to 1950s cigarette filters. So it gets more challenging to make those distinctions. Like it's really difficult to know what to do with faunal bone when you know that there is an 18th century site right next to a 19th century site. Whose faunal bone was it, right?
Well,
so-
and one of the
that's
other
a-
things that's really, from a lab perspective, is that the pieces are tiny.
Yeah.
So that the kind of, this site is a great lesson in ceramics because you will get everything from 1750 to 1848, all in your unit coming out at the same time. None of them are going to be pieces big enough to mend together. For those of you who have come on sort of lab expedition programs where we've spent a lot of time mending pieces together, these are very small, and particularly artifacts like faunal bones, so animal bones, which are incredibly delicate, they get smashed to smithereens. So it emphasizes
This
well,
example of your smithereen bone.
yeah, your smithereen bone. So the impact is not only that they're in a mixed together in a layer, but they're also that it really affects the size of the artifacts and what artifacts will remain whole, what artifacts that we will be able to really use until we get into that feature layer. So once we get underneath the plow zone and we get into the features, which are the things like wells or pits or foundations, things dug into the ground, then we can really start to get at a lot of that information. And I think that that's, really talking about the goals for this season and the previous season is that information gathering. My hope is, and I've talked about the home farm like this and similarly, but our goal is to get a buffet of options to then choose from for doing deeper research. So we say, we've got these wells, we've got these possible building structures, we've got these possible yard features, here are all these choices. And then we can sit down with the MDC, with other groups, and with expeditioners and say, what are you interested in? What kind of questions should we be asking? How can we look at this more? So I want to give Matt a real quick opportunity to say something because he looks like he's got something to say. And then I'm going to open it up. There are some questions in the chat and I want to go to some of those. And then if you have any more questions, raise your hand or put them in the chat.
No, Mary, you said it all perfectly. I was all
Thanks.
excited about talking about features and you summed it up nicely.
So for in the chat, one of the questions that Victoria asked is, there are presumably many potential sites still to be investigated at Montpelier, correct? We have almost 2,700 acres and we've only surveyed about 20-something% of them. What is the opportunity cost of deciding to carry on work at the Overseller site? So the real quick answer is we've already received the grant. The money is already in hand. So we spend the money that has been given to us and that we have earned. But after that, I think it comes into those bigger conversations with the MDC and with the rest of the property of what are the goals of Montpelier? What are the stories we want to tell? What are the sites we want to investigate? What are the places we want to reconstruct? But for right now, the money's already in hand. So we can't give it back. They won't take it.
Nor would we want to.
Nor would we want to.
And it seems before this, Mary, Chris, Terry, and I were talking about how long we've been at the Overseer's house. And it seems like we've been there a long time, but it's because this past 3 years have been so fragmented with various things that have gone on from COVID to other things. This will be our third fall season there, but we have not, all the rest of the time we've spent on surveying the home farm. So we spent a lot more time and energy on the home farm than we have the Overseers. And what we're doing with the work this season is finalizing that evaluation of all the different potential features that, like Mary said so well, is this palette of options that we could put into the research design. And even despite the amount of resources that we've been given by NEH, we're not going to be able to cover, a quarter of the excavations at the Overseer's house. And that would be that, and that's good because what we want to do is continue to phase this. I mean, this is what we did at the South Yard. We did the initial surveys of the South Yard, discovered the potential for buildings, did excavations on a small portion that allowed us to understand what could be rebuilt. And then once we understood that, that's when we went into consultation with the descendants and other groups to figure out what to do with the south yard itself. And this would be, for the home farm. So, the one of the even bigger questions is what else to excavate at the home farm eventually, along with the overseers.
And I think also worth noting, and this kind of piggybacks on what Robert just asked here in the chat. Also, the survey of the home farm is all part of that research project that we proposed in the NEH grant. So the work at the overseer's house was, and as far as the research grant is concerned, we proposed through phase 3. So taking that project, that site, an extra step further. But part of understanding the lived experience of the overseer is also understanding the entire space that the overseer is responsible for managing. And so part of that grant was to also do the survey work that we've been doing over the last few years to identify what those sites were, which also, of course, allows us to understand that also the experience of the enslaved laborers who are working at those spaces also. And as Chris eloquently said earlier, right, all of these lives are interconnected and interwoven, and the evidence and the results so far are certainly showing all the intersections. So it was so we've kind of been doing the research project all along. We just haven't tapped into the money hasn't been tapped into yet, and and we haven't we were intending initially to do the overseer's house all the way through first, and things like COVID, where we couldn't all of a sudden have all of the people and all the expeditioners and all the field schools targeted at this site, encouraged us to flip things around.
So we're kind of getting to the end of our time. So I want to take these last 3 minutes to plug some things. The first is, of course, our programs. So we still have spaces this year for our metal detecting program. There are still a few spots left in November. So if you want to come metal detect it with us, please sign up. There's still a few spaces left. The rest of our fall dig programs are full. There may be one spot available, but we're pretty much full for the rest of the year for excavation. But our 2023 schedule is up and available. We kick it off in March with lab. Woo! And I'm really excited about it. There's going to be pretty things besides just iron. So just throwing that out there for all of you that aren't just rusty metal heads.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with iron.
There's nothing wrong with iron, but sometimes it's nice to see something pretty. But we will start that up in March, and then we have all of our programs. Chris just put the link into for registration for all of our programs in the chat. No experience is necessary. The other thing, we are running an early bird special right now. So if you hop off this call and go sign up, you will get a discount. And who doesn't love a discount? So so we offer discounts for folks that sign up for programs more than 6 months in advance. So immediately get off this call, go sign up. The other plug I want to make is we are in September, which in the world of Montpelier is Constitution Month. So for many of you all who have been around for a long time, you know that we've always celebrated Constitution Day, one of the lesser known holidays in the United States, but one that we hold very dear to our heart here. But this year we've expanded to celebrate all month long, and there's an amazing series of programming that's happening both virtually and in person. But I really just want to call your attention to the events that are happening on this Saturday, which is Constitution Day. It will be an amazing day on the property with special tours. We'll have an archaeology booth set up, so I'll be singing and dancing and showing off artifacts from our latest finds. But there's 2 really exciting panels. And for those of you who are local, I encourage you to register and come to hear them in person. But for those of you that are, and I'm calling local everything within 2 hours driving distance. So that's looking at you, Northern Virginia. But for those of you who are out of the area, you can join those panels virtually. In the morning, there's going to be an amazing panel with our board chair, and James French, as well as the chair of the Montpelier Descendants Committee, talking about our new government structure. And in the afternoon, there's going to be a really amazing panel called Is the Constitution in Danger? That features Jamel Bowie, who is a very well-known New York Times columnist, Michael Higginbotham, who's a professor of law, and Lindsay Sheravinsky, who's the senior fellow of presidential history at SMU. So it's going to be a really powerful program. Please join us. If you can't join us in person, join us virtually. Sign up for a program. There are a lot of really exciting things happening at Montpelier right now, and our team is working to try to bring that to everyone, both on the property and off the property. So for those of you who can come, I really hope to see you all on Saturday. And you can come by, say hello. Our whole staff will be on property working, and we would love to see you all there. But thank you all so much again for spending the day with us. We will be sending out information soon about the rest of our lunch and learns. We need to schedule some for November and December. But hope to see you on a program. Hope to see you at Constitution Day and throughout Constitution Month. And have a great rest of your day.
Good seeing everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see all your faces and names.
Bye. Thank you all.
Yeah.